In this video, we will learn about two-dimensional arrays. Before we start understanding how 2D arrays work, let's understand the concept of a nested for loop. Consider the two for loops that we have in this segment. There is a R for loop, and this loop runs from 1 to 4. And inside of that loop, there is another C for loop, which runs from 1 to 3. So you've got a loop inside of a loop. In order to understand how this works, let's do a trace of the code segment that we have here. Let's look at the value for R. Let's look at the value for C. And then let's look at what our output is each time this statement here executes, which displays the value of R with a tab and then the value of C in a rich edit. So starting at the beginning of the R loop, for R from 1 to 4, this loop is going to execute 4 times, starting at 1. So R has the value 1. Begin, and as we go into the R loop, another loop is found, and that's the C loop, which is going to run 3 times. So the first value that C takes on is also 1. We go into that loop, and this is a display, a readout.lines.add, and we're displaying R tab C, which R is 1, a tab, and C is 1. So we're displaying 1, 1. The question is, when we hit the end of the C loop, what happens? Do we go back up to the R loop, or do we go back up to the C loop? Because the loops are nested, the C loop is inside of the R loop. The C loop has to continue and finish execution before it can go back up to the R loop. So let's go back up, and C then becomes 2 and begin, and we output RC. R still remains 1, a tab, and then C is 2. Hit the end. Remember, C must complete, go back up. C becomes 3 and display RC, and it's going to display 1 and 3. At this stage, the C loop has finished. It's gone up to 3, which means we come out of that and we hit the end, and the end takes us back to the R loop, and R now increments. It was 1, that's now going to become 2, and begin, we encounter the C loop again, which is going to execute 3 times all over again, starting from 1. And that's going to output R, which is 2 this time, C, which is 1. C is going to become 2. It's going to output 2, 2. C is going to become 3. It's going to output 2, 3. At which stage the C loop has finished. It's going to come out of the C loop and go back up to the R loop, and R is now going to become 3. And you guessed right, the C is going to continue again 3 times, starting at 1. It's going to be 3, 1. It's going to become 2, 3, 2. C is going to become 3. It's going to output 3, 3. The C loop would have finished, go back out, and R then becomes 4. And we go back in, and C starts again, 1. So it's going to output 1, 4, a 4, 1, 4, 2, and 4, 3. In which case the C loop has finished, it comes out. But when we go back to the R loop has also finished its cycle, which means that we are finished with the nested loop, and this is the output. So for each time that R was 1, C had to complete its cycle before R could be incremented. So our output is 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, 4, 1, 4, 2, 4, 3. And you will see that this helps us very much when we work with two-dimensional arrays in terms of its positions. let's look at how two-dimensional arrays now work. In terms of its declaration, you give the two-dimensional array a name. We use the reserved word array, but this is where it's a little different compared to one dimensions. A one-dimensional array would have stopped there, but because it's got two dimensions, we specify the range for both the dimensions. The first dimension refers to the rows, and the second dimension refers to the number of columns. So this particular array has 4 rows and 3 columns. If we had to try to visualize that, it has 4 rows, that's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it has 3 columns, 1, 2, 3. So this is row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4. So these are my rows. And then here I've got column 1, column 2, and column 3. It has 3 columns. How do we refer to each cell in the array? Well, this, in a one-dimensional array, it was cell 1, cell 2, cell 3. But in a two-dimensional array, we now have to give it 2 dimensions, 1, 1. The first one being the row, row 1, column 1, 1, 2, row 1, column 2, and 1, 3, which is row 1, column 3. So this then continues. This is row 2, column 1, row 2, column 2, row 2, column 3, row 3, column 1, row 3, column 2, row 3, column 3, and then we've got row 4, column 1, row 4, column 2, row 4, column 3. So these are the positions in the array, but at position 1, 1, there will be some value that will be stored, for example, 10. At position 1, 2, there could be a value that's stored, which could be 100. And at position 1, 3, there is a value that is stored, which could be 20. So if the name of our array is called ARR, then we will say ARR, and we specify the row, which is 1, comma, 2, which is the column, and that takes on the value 10. Remember, we always have the row first, and then we have the column. So this is how we address or access a two-dimensional array. And why did I start off with the nested for loop? If you look at the nested for loop very carefully, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. Our position 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. And then it went to 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, and so forth. So by using a nested for loop as we did, we generate the positions very nicely for a two-dimensional array. So if we look at input in a two-dimensional array that has 4 rows and 3 columns, we run our for loop from 1 to 4. We run our second for loop from 1 to 3. And our array, in this case, the array was called ARR2D. R, C takes on the value random range, and the values that are being generated are in the range 1 to 10. So these values are stored in the array. The first value R takes on is 1. The first value C takes on is 1. So in array 1, 1, in array position 1, 1, we are generating a random value, and this value is being stored in position 1, 1 of the array. Remember, the C value goes up, C becomes 2. So another random value is stored in 1, 2, which is in that position. C becomes 3, and then another random value is stored in 1, 3. And then it goes back up, R becomes 2, and then you're working with row 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, and 2, 3. So this is how two-dimensional arrays work using the nested for loop. This is how we input values in the array.